The rhythmic sound of her heartbeat filled the small consultation room. Clara could feel the cold touch of the stethoscope pressing against her chest as the doctor, with eyes both sorrowful and focused, watched the monitor by her side. There was something in the doctor's expression that made Clara hold her breath, an unspoken tension that stretched the moment, as if the world was preparing her for what was to come. "Clara," the doctor began softly, her voice laced with a calculated gentleness. "The tests have revealed something we need to discuss calmly." But that tone, that deliberate tenderness, only magnified the growing dread in Clara's stomach. "Unfortunately," the doctor continued, her voice growing even quieter, "the tumor is inoperable. It's in an advanced stage, very advanced. I'm so sorry." The doctor's words hung in the air, each one slicing through Clara's mind like sharp blades, too painful to process all at once. Clara sat motionless, the shock rendering her unable to react. Her lips tried to form a question, but her throat was dry, and her heart raced uncontrollably. The doctor kept talking, explaining palliative treatments and the steps they could take to maintain her quality of life. But Clara heard none of it. The only word echoing in her head was terminal. When she finally left the consultation room, the bright sunlight momentarily blinded her, a stark contrast to the darkness that now weighed heavily inside her. She glanced at her phone and saw a message from Lucas. "Love, don't forget about dinner tonight. I can't wait to see you." Her heart sank. How could she possibly tell Lucas that their time together was slipping away, that every moment they had left would be a farewell? How could she look into his eyes and explain that each smile, each touch, would be tainted with the knowledge of the inevitable? Tears stung her eyes, but instead of giving in, Clara made a decision that would change everything. Lucas didn't need to know. She wanted to savor every second they had left, free from the looming shadow of death. With a heavy heart but newfound resolve, Clara tucked her phone away and lifted her head high. She would make these days the most memorable of their lives. In the days that followed, Clara threw herself into the illusion of normalcy. Her time with Lucas became a series of carefully orchestrated moments, each one designed to maximize joy and hide any trace of her illness. She took him to their favorite spots, where they spent hours talking about everything except the future. They walked through city parks, letting the gentle breeze wash over them, bringing with it fleeting moments of freedom. But as much as Clara tried to control the course of events, her body began to betray her. The first time she felt weakness in her legs, she masked her panic with a smile, gripping Lucas's arm tighter and laughing it off as a reaction to the heat. He didn't suspect a thing, accepting her excuses with the same love and tenderness he had always shown her. Clara knew she couldn't let these moments of vulnerability become frequent, but with every chest pain, every sudden wave of exhaustion, she forced herself to downplay it. However, Lucas wasn't blind. He noticed the small signs, the slight tremor in her hands as she held her coffee cup, the dark circles under her eyes that she tried to cover with makeup, the absence of any plans for the future. He knew her well enough to sense something was wrong. One evening, while they were sitting on her apartment balcony, he looked at her for a long time, his eyes searching her face for answers. "Clara, are you okay? You've been different lately. You seem distant." His voice was soft, but filled with genuine concern. She felt a lump form in her throat, but she quickly forced a smile. "I'm just tired. Work has been overwhelming, that's all." He pulled her close, running his fingers through her hair and sighing. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" She closed her eyes, savoring the warmth of his embrace. For a brief moment, she almost gave in. She almost told him everything. But the fear of seeing the pain in his eyes was too much to bear. So, she simply nodded. "I know." That night, as Lucas slept beside her, Clara lay awake, watching him under the soft glow of the moonlight streaming through the window. She knew how precious every moment like this was, but the weight of her secret and the guilt of hiding it from him were suffocating her. Still, she resisted. Silently, she slipped out of bed, walking to the bathroom. Staring at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the pale, exhausted face looking back at her. The toll of the illness was becoming harder to conceal, and with each passing day, The reality of her situation became more impossible to ignore. But Clara had made her choice. She would fight to keep Lucas in the dark, if only to protect him from the unbearable truth, for as long as she could. Everything pointed to the fact that her time was running out, yet she continued to smile. Not for herself, but for the man who loved her unconditionally. The man she could still keep in the dark for now. There was still time left, and Clara was determined to make the most of every single second. The sun was high in the sky when Clara and Lucas arrived at the restaurant for dinner. It was one of those cozy places that Clara loved, with soft lighting and intimate tables, creating an ambience perfect for special moments. She wanted this night to be one of those, a peaceful pause in the storm that was silently brewing in her life. But behind each smile she gave Lucas, the constant reminder that time was slipping away, gnawed at her. The evening had begun well, filled with laughter and light-hearted conversation, but Clara already felt the early signs of exhaustion creeping in. Her head felt heavier than usual, and the food she once enjoyed now made her stomach churn with nausea. She pretended everything was fine, putting on a brave face, but her body was slowly betraying her efforts. When Lucas got up to use the restroom, Clara took the opportunity to close her eyes for just a moment, trying to take deep breaths and quell the dizziness. However, as she rose to adjust her chair, she suddenly felt a wave of emptiness in her legs, an overwhelming weakness that took hold of her. The last thing she saw was the horrified expressions of the other restaurant patrons before everything around her faded to black. When she awoke, the bright hospital lights pierced her eyes, and the familiar smell of disinfectant surrounded her. Clara blinked, trying to orient herself. What had happened? Her thoughts were jumbled, and reality felt distant. But then she saw Lucas's face beside her. The worry etched in his eyes was unmistakable. His jaw clenched as if he was trying with all his might to keep it together. "Clara, what's going on?" His voice was barely a whisper, thick with a pain Clara had never heard before. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could say a word, a doctor entered the room. "Lucas, may we speak outside, please?" The doctor gestured subtly, with the kind of gravity that only serious conversations carried. Clara watched in silence as Lucas, reluctantly, followed the doctor out, her heart pounding as panic began to well up inside her. Out in the hallway, the truth was finally laid bare. The doctor's words hit Lucas like an unbearable weight. "She has terminal cancer," the doctor explained gently. "There's not much we can do beyond palliative care. I imagine she hasn't told you." The last part of the doctor's statement felt distant, almost muted, as Lucas's world began to crumble. He leaned against the wall, struggling to breathe. How had Clara kept something so devastating from him? When he returned to the room, Clara could see it in his eyes. The secret was out. His gaze was a whirlwind of anger, pain, and confusion, and at that moment, she knew she could no longer keep up the charade. The silence in the room became suffocating as Lucas stood beside the bed, fists clenched while Clara, still weak, looked at him with a mixture of guilt and sorrow. He didn't know how to begin, didn't know what to say. All he knew was that his heart was shattered. "Why?" Lucas's voice finally broke the silence, and Clara flinched at the sound of the anguish in his tone. "Why didn't you tell me?" Clara took a deep breath, searching for the right words, but knowing that no explanation could ever take away the pain. "I wanted to protect you, Lucas," she said softly. "I wanted us to have our last moments together without that shadow hanging over us. I didn't want you living in dread, waiting for the end." Lucas shook his head in disbelief, the hurt evident in every gesture. "Protect me?" His voice trembled. "This is what you call protection, Clara? You pushed me away. You left me in the dark while everything was falling apart." She swallowed hard, feeling the weight of every word he spoke. He was right. She had chosen a path that, though driven by love, had also been selfish. Clara reached out her hand, hoping he would take it, but Lucas hesitated, his eyes cast down to the floor. "I just wanted you to be happy," she whispered, tears now streaming down her face. "I didn't want you to suffer before you had to." Lucas didn't respond right away. The pain in his chest was overwhelming, but he could see the desperation in her eyes, the love that had motivated her actions, no matter how misguided. Finally, with a heavy sigh, he sat down beside her and gently took her hand, though his expression still bore the marks of heartbreak. "I love you, Clara," he said quietly, his voice steady but laced with hurt. "But love means facing things together, not hiding them." They both sat in silence, the weight of the truth between them. For a long while, Clara's breathing was irregular, her fingers interlaced with Lucas's in a gesture of silent reconciliation. Lucas knew there wasn't time left for anger. Even though he was still hurting, he understood that his love for Clara was far greater than any feelings of betrayal. All he wanted now was to be by her side during these final moments, with no more secrets between them. Clara looked at him with gratitude, knowing that, despite the burden of her secret, they could now spend the time they had left together, truly connected. The end was near, but finally, they were ready to face it side by side. The days that followed were quiet, yet filled with a heavy, unspoken sorrow. Clara and Lucas spent most of their time in the hospital, where she now received palliative care. The hospital, once a place of dread for both of them, had transformed into a space where reality was impossible to escape, but where they could confront it together. Every gesture, every word exchanged, felt like an unspoken farewell, an attempt to hold on to what was slipping away. Lucas was always at her side, holding her hand, reading to her, or simply sitting in silence, cherishing every second they had left. Time seemed to slow down, as if the clock that had haunted Clara for so long had finally eased its relentless pace. Now, united in their awareness of the truth, they found peace in their shared connection. "I'm so sorry for hiding this from you," Clara whispered during a moment of weakness, her voice soft, almost fragile. Her eyes, though tired, were filled with love and regret. "I know, Clara," Lucas replied gently, squeezing her hand a little tighter. "And I forgive you. I just want to be here with you." They gazed at each other, their silence saying more than words ever could. There was a quiet acceptance, a mutual understanding that there was no longer any need for apologies or regrets. Their love had surpassed the pain, the anger, and the fear. That night, as the full moon cast a soft glow over the hospital room, Clara smiled at Lucas one last time. He leaned in, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "I love you, Clara. Always." Her eyes closed slowly, as if drifting into a peaceful sleep, and Lucas felt her hand gently loosen its grip. The room fell into silence, and Clara's breathing stopped, leaving Lucas alone with the deepest pain he had ever known. Yet, as he looked at her serene face, he knew she was finally at peace, and somehow, that comforted him. He had lost the love of his life, but the final moments they shared, as painful as they were, had been a gift, one that he would carry with him forever. Weeks passed after Clara's funeral, but Lucas still felt her absence in every aspect of his life. Gradually, though, he began to find ways to honor Clara's legacy. He thought of her with every decision he made, every step he took. The love they had shared didn't end with her death. On the contrary, it became a transformative force in his life. Lucas began visiting the places Clara loved, the cozy cafes, the parks, the hidden corners of the city that now seemed to be filled with her presence. On one of those walks, he sat on a bench in the park where they used to stroll together. For the first time since Clara's death, he felt a quiet peace settle over him. Under the clear blue sky, he made a promise to himself. He would live his life with the same passion and love that Clara had shown until the very end. He knew she would never have wanted him to remain trapped in grief. She would have wanted him to find happiness again. In that moment, Lucas understood that true love doesn't end with death. It transcends time, distance, and loss. Clara might have been gone, but the impact she had on his life, the strength of her love, would stay with him forever. And so, with a heart full of memories but also gratitude, Lucas stood up and looked toward the horizon. The future was uncertain, but he was ready to face it, carrying Clara with him in every step, in every decision, in every new day. If you enjoy heartfelt stories, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you in the next video.